It's March 9th. Kicking dirt. Uh, Kevin's, we're getting ready. It feels like spring out. We should be planting corn next week, but we can't. But it is. It feels crazy. Uh, Getting ready and prepared to put in plots and all this other things. There's a lot of conversation about the ag economy right now and fertilizer prices, and I know everybody's ramping up their crop insurance and getting that ready to go. We thought it'd be good to have a guest on, kind of surrounds that. I've been listening to him for a few weeks here recently here, and I really enjoy his podcast on that. We got Damian Mason. Damian, you introduce yourself?
Hi there, Damian Mason. Thanks for having me on the Kick and Dirt show. I appreciate it. And I will go ahead and tell your listeners that I was vetted before we hit the record button. They asked me what type of seed was on the De La Rosa Farms in Huntington, Indiana. So I did go ahead and tell them. The truth is, a lot of our stuff is in alfalfa. I didn't get around to telling you all that, but we have. I rent my stuff to a dairyman, so so ideally it doesn't get planted, but every 5 years, and then we go usually from alfalfa to triticale or corn, and then back to alfalfa. So there you go.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit about your background, and I knew you're a keynote speaker and you do a podcast. One of your things is agricultural comedian. I did not know that. You gotta before this is over, you gotta lay your best ag joke on us before.
Nah, I don't know about all that. Well, comedy's a little tougher. Comedy's a tougher situation given the sensitivity and then the political correctness and whatnot. And everybody's decided that being offended is a power move. So if you can proclaim that you're offended by something, then you dictate the conversation. So I actually don't market myself as a comedy guy anymore because even though I am funny, I don't like to lead with that because it creates this situation where then folks think, oh well, this way I can pretend that I'm offended and then I can dictate what happens. So yeah, I used to be a comedy guy. The way I got into this line of work, you asked a little bit about my background, so I'll go ahead and throw it out there. Some of your people that listen to this might listen to my Business of Agriculture show or may have been in one of my audiences. I do speak all over North America at agricultural functions. The way it all started, I'm a farm kid from Northeast Indiana, was raised on a dairy farm. I live a couple miles from where I was raised. I went back to Huntington, Indiana, and bought farm properties. And I fixed up. There's a picture up behind me here. I fixed up an old 1800s era farmhouse and for my wife, and we live there. I live there most of the year, but I also have a house in Arizona. I'm coming to you from my Arizona home right now, my home office out here, because I do not like winter, which is interesting because if you work in agriculture, you cover winter meetings. So I get to the Kearneys and the Yorks, and I can start naming all the Nebraska towns where you guys hail from, Beatrice, Wisner. I can go on and on and on about those places, Columbus. Anyway, um, I travel all over. That's kind of been my thing. But yeah, the way it all started in 1994, which is probably before a couple of you were born, I quit corporate America. I had a degree from Purdue University in agricultural economics. I got out of college in 92. There was nothing good happening in agriculture. Almost
It was
almost
terrible time, wasn't it? It was a
from
terrible time.
81 until late 90s, early 2000s, there was just absolutely crickets out here, and it was a bad place to be. I did not go to work in agriculture. My degree in agricultural economics, there was very, very little happening, very little, and all the baby boomers were in front of me because I know I'm 56 years old. So there was a whole glut of people in front of me that were clinging on to their jobs. So I went and sold lighting products. And I was in Indiana and I was in California. And when I was in California, I won a costume contest on Halloween dressed up as Bill Clinton. I took the microphone and started doing some shtick. So then my company thought this was funny. So they started making me do Bill Clinton at sales meetings and trade shows where I'd have to dress up as Bill Clinton and be the draw and or the entertainment. So then I quit my job and became a professional Bill Clinton impersonator in 1994. My goal was to be creative and to be compensated based on my work ethic, not based on my ability to do political. I want to be a political comedian, not a politician within a corporate structure. So that was the impetus. And here we are now, almost 32 years later. I have not had a real job in 32 years. So the political comedy thing was huge. I was in movies and TV shows and commercials and on
Serious.
stages at corporate events all over. And then I became a ag guy. So after the Clinton thing dried up, it spent a few years sort of twisting in the wind and Looked at buying car washes, and I started a landscaping business and some other things. And then finally, I said, you know what? I understand agriculture. I've been around it my whole life, and this is my education, and I'm funny. So I became the ag comedy guy. So it wouldn't be uncommon that you were at a ag meeting in York, Nebraska, and then Damian Mason is on stage. So that was about 13 years ago. Companies said, hey, we know you're funny and we know you know ag. Can you throw some more business points in there? And I said, well, I just told you I have a degree in agricultural economics. I read the Wall Street Journal every day. I've owned and run several businesses. Can I make some business points? Well, hell yes. So then I absolutely became the commentary guy. And then about 8.5 years ago began the Business of Agriculture show, which you already referenced, which is in the top 2% of listened to podcasts globally and also does very well on YouTube. So that has been really a fun venture for me. I mean, it's a profit center. I get sponsorship, but it's also really good because he keeps my head in the game. And that's, I think, really,
Yeah.
really an important thing. Mrs. Mason and I just went for a hike this morning with our dog, and we were just talking about that. She says, how many more reinventions do you have in you? From the lighting fixture sale, the farm kid to the lighting fixture salesman to the Bill Clinton impersonator to the ag comedy guy to the ag outlook economics guy to the podcast show host to whatever. So she says, how many more of these do you have in you? And then that's obviously a question for all of us.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. My only goal is to be able to talk as fast as you someday. I do these podcasts and I start out and I listen to it. It sounds a little draggy. And then I hear you talk and you're just rolling around. So you could have a voice in radio if you wanted it.
Well, I have a lot. I have a lot of thoughts. My wife actually, she says, she says, I think you're autistic because you have no comprehension of human emotion. And I said, that's not true. When I'm on stage, I can feel the crowd. She says, yeah, when you're on stage, you can feel the crowd. She says, you don't seem to understand feelings in general. I said, oh, okay. She says, but also, she says, I've been reading this thing about autistic people that are brilliant. She says, you're 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 damn brilliant. She says, you can think on the spot and have like 1 million thoughts going through your head. And also, she says, most people can't get on stage and talk for 75 minutes without a note and rattle off numbers like you do. She's like, you're somewhere between like the Rain Man character in that movie. And so I do have a lot to say, and I do get sometimes going a little bit. I sometimes get over my skis because I get talking too quickly and want to have so much information out there.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's get into this. Keller, you got some things or Kowalski to start off with?
Yeah, just thinking about timeline here, we could talk about the current events and future. There's a lot of stuff going on in ag always, and that's probably why you never run out of stuff to talk about because there's always something going on. So, I guess right now, boy, there's a lot of volatility. So, kind of a two-part question. Um, A, maybe just a quick discussion on what's driving some of the volatilities right now. We've got grains overnight. We're just going crazy. Of course, they've kind of softened now, but the ups and downs on that for being super stagnant for a long time. Got energies through the roof with some of the stuff that's going on over in Iran, and obviously that's driving some fertilizer things right now. What's Damien, what's your perspective on this? I guess as we look over the next few months and growers are trying to really look at the both sides of the balance sheet, the grains that they're trying to sell and the inputs that they're trying to buy.
Well, remember that I'm not a markets person, an expert.
Right.
I absolutely defer to all that, from the Joe Vaclavic and Matt Bennett and those guys. There's so many of these people that are markets gurus. I'm not a market. I'm familiar. Obviously, I keep up with it because we are in a commodity production business. You mentioned something interesting, Kevin. You said, "Boy, there's a lot of volatility." You know, okay, I could take a dart and just put a wall up with every day of every month of every week of every year since I was a kid and throw a dart at it. And you know what? If you tuned into an ag media on that day, it'd say, well, there's a lot of volatility out here. I mean, come on. What's the old thing? Nature abhors a vacuum. Well, look at it this way when it comes to volatility. Anytime that somehow you're told that there is no volatility, then the media or the news cycle is going to create volatility. Right now, okay, the situation in Iran. What was it 4 years ago? Russia invaded Ukraine. What was it before that? Trump's trade war. What was it before that? You can go through any of these scenarios. The one, how shall I say, defining, Kevin, if you will, the one thing that might make this a little different. In other words, my point is volatility is always here. And when I say nature abhors a vacuum, markets actually thrive on volatility. How the hell
Mhm.
would you make any money if there's no price moves, right? How would you ever make a trade if everything just stayed the exact same? So there's always going to be volatility. In fact, I think that it's contrived, right? What are we talking about now? Probably fuel. Like if I was to say one big thing right now, we kind of looked like we had inflation about at least leveling off, right? We were getting to that 2% range, which has sort of historically been the goal. And this is on everything. This is from the food you buy at the Kroger to the inputs that the producers that are listening to this show are buying. And trust me, I'm not being in any way insensitive. I understand what they are up against. But the fuel, I think, is probably the big one right now. You're heading into a season, specifically to agriculture. Your inputs, whether it's seed, herbicide, whatever, we already know where they are, right? And then there's the cries out here in the production realm that these input costs are killing us. Okay. And I've heard the other thing from the farmer trade groups. Well, these oligopolies are doing this to us. Well, let's be realistic about something. You work for Corteva. Is Corteva racking up 400% profit margins? No. Probably hanging around 25 to 35%, just like every other business is and every other industry. It always ends up, as long as there's at least one other competitor, you end up working yourself right into that 25 to 35% profit margin. So, are input prices harmful right now to the bottom line for producers? There's no question that they are. But is it because somehow the big bad ag companies are knocking back, 900% profit margins? That's not even close. I'd say the one thing, going back to your query, is about the volatility. I think fuel is going to be the wild card right now. I was just 3 months ago, 2 months ago, saying, "Hey, wait a minute! Everybody's caring on about biofuels. We better hope that they legislate the demand for this because we just went over and took over Venezuela, which has the biggest oil reserves of any country in the world, and now basically they're going to be our sort of satellite." And I'm like, I don't think this is very good for biofuels because we're just going to go ahead and start tapping Venezuela. Well, then we create this thing in the Middle East, and it didn't take much for the energy companies to decide this was enough volatility for them to really jack these numbers up. So if farmers didn't pre-buy fuel, you're we don't go over the ground as much as we used to. Like when I was a kid, where you fall plowed and then you disked and then you field cultivated and you field cultivated
Yeah.
again, and you went out there with a cultivator. So you're not using as much fuel, but it's still going to be a bottom line thing. So I would look at volatility and fuel being a problem. I don't know that anything else really is going to change much because we already knew where they were in terms of the other inputs. As far as the markets, like I said, bearing in mind that I'm not a markets expert, uh, how volatile really are they?
Yep. They've been pretty stagnant. This is probably the first time we've really seen a move. And obviously, after the report about a month ago, they took a little bit of a drop. But we're talking, 20 cents. If you zoom out on any of those and look at a 5-year trend, to your point, it wasn't a big move, more stagnant. So, like you said, though, I mean, it seems like volatility always comes up in conversations around probably whatever business a person's running. It's not just ag. But what are some tools, I guess, as you think through both business and ag economics that growers can look at to help reduce their risk? Because whether if there's volatility or not, there's either perceived or it's going to happen eventually if there's a void of market moves. So it's going to happen. But what are some tools that are maybe newer? We could talk either Farm Bill or Big Beautiful Bill, or even just crop insurance. But what are some things that you see that are actually helpful in reducing risk in this ag business?
So let's go ahead and cut to the chase. And this is something that ag people do not necessarily like to hear this, but it is true. And so I've had some people that throw that get a little bit they get a little mad at me for saying this. Just think about any business. Let's say you're a roofing contractor. Can you get an insurance policy paid for by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to guarantee you revenue as a roofing contractor? No.
I
Say I
don't.
own the line, I own the dry cleaners down the road, and all of a sudden,
No.
all of a sudden, The COVID thing shuts it down to where people don't have to dress up to go to work. Hell, they don't even go to work. They just sit and look at their Zoom call in their sweatpants, right? Um, do you do a bunch of dry cleaning now? No, because you don't need to take your sweatpants to the dry cleaner. Did the government did kick in and gave them money for their employees, but they didn't guarantee them revenue. Agriculture is the business, the only business where you can get a taxpayer funded insurance policy to guarantee you net revenue. And farm people argue, they get mad because they believe that I'm attacking them. It is not attacking them. The point is, when you said about removing risk, Kevin, I can't think of any business that has. You can say we deal with all kinds of risk. We got weather. Well, the construction company has weather risk also. We have revenue changes. Okay. And then the other one, of course, that you hear from farm people is we don't get to fix our price. We're price takers. Okay. I shot a video about this, and I'm sure that my friend Mike probably watched it. Ultimately, you're always a price taker. Okay. So I've got this plastic cup in my hand right here, and I make these plastic cups. And I decide, you know what? I'm going to charge $40 for this plastic cup. Everybody else that makes plastic cups selling them for 40 cents. So I can set my price, whatever I want to, but it's not going to sell. So ultimately, every business ends up being a price taker. You're a pioneer. You sell a bag of corn for 300 and some dollars. You can say, you know what? We're going to charge $10,000 for this bag of corn. How many bags are you going to sell? None, right? Because the competitor down the road, whether it's DeKalb, Channel, name the company, down the road is going to do it for less. So my point here is, really, when you talk about removing risk, let's admit this general overlying reality. You're already de-risked as a producer more than most other small businesses are in terms of your ability to insure yourself into revenue. That being said, you have to exploit the resources that you have. And the best thing, and I've had people on my show about this, Kevin, fusing your crop insurance with your marketing program with the government policy and programs. I'm not an expert on that. I got a brother, Eric, 40-year veteran with the United States Department of Agriculture. He can explain all that stuff from SEO and SCO and all that stuff. Not my strength, but the point is, I think that you're already probably in a pretty strong position to be de-risked. I'm not saying necessarily hugely profitable, but at least in a situation where you can de-risk yourself to break even. And not to mention subsidies. I mean, we just announced $12 billion is going to be going out right now in March. And there's talk that there's another $15 to $17 billion being tossed around, probably going to happen by summer. If I had to predict, you talk about de-risking, you rolling into the midterms. Does any politician want to stand up and say, oh, we're going to let these farmers go broke? I'm not going to vote for that $17 billion addition. So that's where I think we are. And I think there's going to be, is it going to be rosy out here? No. Are there going to be farmers that exit the game? Yeah. Is it because of pure financial hardship? Demographics. I'm getting old. I was 77 years old. I probably should have stopped 5 years ago, but I was making so much money I couldn't. I mean, that's where I think we are on production agriculture right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That is
Damian,
kinda-
I guess
No, that
since
is
you're kind
kinda-
of talking about risk and profitability, and I've listened to some of your stuff too here. You kind of talk a lot about like regulation, sustainability. And I guess what I love is you kind of give guys things to think through, and just you might get some hate mail because of it or whatever. But what are some of those long-term, short-term regulations, watch outs that you think might impact, growers today? And, just kind of maybe go into that a little bit.
If I had to give you one big thing, I'd say it's water. You said before we hit the record button, you were kind of bragging it up, 369 bushel corn. That's cute. That's wonderful. See, they're laughing right now. The non-viewer can't see that you're laughing about this because you know it's true. And by the way, great. Pioneer Genetics, fantastic. Obviously, you're the biggest seed company in the country, right? And you got good stuff. Fantastic. Good for you. Now, my question is, was that on irrigated ground by chance in Nebraska? Oh, it was, wasn't it? So let's start.
Absolutely.
So let's start asking this next question. We invented legislation 21 years ago, the Renewable Fuel Standard. And by doing that, there's 196 ethanol plants, generally in the corn belt, obviously, because we use corn to power the ethanol plants to make fuel. We just took over Venezuela. We might end up taking over Iran. We know that we've got more oil. When I was a little boy playing with my Matchbox toys, and I told everybody I was going to have, a 1973 Dodge Charger when I grow up, and I'm going to have a 74 El Camino Super Sport with a 454. And these people pat me on the head and say, "You're such a cute little boy. Those cars won't even be around when you're old enough to afford all of them because we're going to run out of oil." Got told that from the time I was in kindergarten. We got 40 more years of oil. So 50 years later, we still have more than 40 years of oil. So the point I'm making to you is we don't have an oil shortage. There never really was one. Now we're taking over countries that have copious amounts of oil, and yet we legislated 21 years ago this need to burn up our fuel, to burn up our corn. So we got 200 ethanol plants burning up 40% of our corn crop. Do you guys, you're in the seed business. Do you know what our corn crop was last year in billions of bushels? Do you guys have it in your head?
Keller does.
Do you know what it was, Kevin?
185 times what, 90?
99 million acres. It
Yeah.
was 17 billion bushels. Okay. And that doesn't mean anything, right? But let me just for the hell of it, let's just juxtapose this. What do you suppose it was 25 years ago? In 2025, we made 17 billion bushels. What do you suppose it was 25 years prior to that, in the year 2000? You just got a number in your head?
Maybe 10.
9.9. So
9.9.
we're
Wow.
making 70% more corn last year than we did a quarter century ago. And I get it, Kevin's a younger guy over here. She's like, Damian's talking about ancient history. Year 2000, I wasn't even born yet. Okay, I'm kidding. But why am I going down this road? You asked about regulation. Put yourself, this is the benefit of not being only in your own little circle. You gave me some comments about my show and my commentary that I put out there. Part of that is derived by reading a lot of different things and being in a lot of different circles and then observing those things. So let's say you were like me and you lived out here in the Phoenix metropolitan area. There's 5.1 million people, and nobody in the Phoenix metroplex is a farmer, and very few of them work in agriculture. Just say you're one of these people and you get told, "Hey, you know what? We're going to up your water charge because we live in a desert after all, and you really can't have yard. You're just going to put in desert landscaping." Okay. And then you pick up the paper and you see that the farmers in Nebraska get their water for free, tapped out of the Ogallala Aquifer, to grow 17 billion bushels of corn, that we had so much corn we had to invent a law 21 years ago to burn it up so we can put it in our gas tank. And we don't even need the ethanol because we just took over Venezuela and we got all this oil that's in the shale up there in North Dakota. So where am I going with this? I believe that water is going to become an absolute war in the next couple of years, maybe next decade. And I've been saying this for a couple of years already. We're going to start having this hard question from the folks that pay those taxes, that support those subsidies. Not being mean. Don't start getting crazy here on you, farmers. I work hard. Okay, no one said you didn't. I'm telling you, the voters that pay the taxes, that pay the subsidies, are going to begin asking the question more and more and more, why are we paying to grow corn in western Kansas when we had to invent laws to use up that corn because there was not enough demand for it? Water and places that are heavily dependent on irrigation are going to feel a big squeeze in the next 1 to 10 years. No question. I would stake my net worth on it, that it's going to be a big deal. And so what does that mean? You talk about regulation. Do we need 99 million acres of corn? Do we? And I get it. You guys sell seed that goes in those 99 million acres. Not being mean, just looking at the tea leaves and the reality of where we are going. Do we need 99 million acres of corn?
Yeah, if yields keep going up and commodity prices are down, and we just think you got to drive yields to make it, you got to have more yield if you're going to grow this much a bushel or whatever.
Well, we're going to have the yield. I mean, there's no question you're going to have the yield. Trust me, it's not because of a lack of genetic potential. You open a bag of any stuff you guys sell, and there's 400 bushel potential in every bag you sell. It's every other factor after that. So where do I see regulation going? I see it being on water, and who's the biggest use of water. Now here's another one I want you to think about, Kevin and Mike. We're hearing now about data centers, And in where I live in Northeast Indiana, there's a lot of population. So there's going to be a push to put in data centers because you're nearer to population, just like energy development. Not going to be an issue in, say, Gering, Nebraska, as much as it's going to be in Huntington, Indiana, just because of population. There's 7 million people in the state of Indiana, and it's about half the size of Nebraska, right? With Nebraska has about 2 million people. So where there's population, there's going to be pressure on this. And there's going to be a push for data centers, which require a tremendous amount of energy. And so that's the new thing. Where we're going to get this energy. Well, the tough part is, again, going back to regulation, we don't use corn or soy to make energy for data centers. We do it for transportation. So maybe that's a lift, and that's going to be good for us because the other energy is going to go to these data centers. But the other problem with these data centers is they need water. So I want you to ask yourself a question. Microsoft and Meta and ChatGPT and Amazon want water, and the guy in Kearney, Nebraska wants water to grow corn. Who wins?
Yeah, the big
Guy with the deeper cut
yeah.
pockets,
I was
right?
gonna say, do you want me to throw that question at you again? I'll ask you to win. Amazon and ChatGPT and Microsoft and Apple want water, and so does the farmer in Kearney, Nebraska. Who's going to win the battle over who gets the water?
Here's the interesting dynamic of that. So we as a seed company are using a lot of AI now in our breeding. So you think about that, AI is essentially going to help us make our hybrids more drought tolerant, which in turn is going to help the growers sell off probably some water rights
Yeah.
to fund things like that. So it's almost a dual revenue stream that, yeah, maybe they're not irrigated corn anymore, but to your point, that water is valuable and will be in the future as well.
Water's never really, Kevin. Water, the problem, except for in maybe California, water's really never had a true economic number attached to it. It's had a political component, right? Vote for me. I'm going to make sure that farmers get their water, whatever. It becomes a battle at the ballot box, or it becomes a battle at the state house. But it's never been. Look at my line items. For me to grow corn, I need that bag of seed from Pioneer. I need those gallons of diesel to run my tractor. I need that fertilizer. I need that cash rent for that land. I can go through every line item. Is water actually put down there as a cost of production? Generally
Not so
not, right?
much other than maybe electricity and the fuel
Yeah.
to run a pivot or something, but
Yeah. And
yeah.
now look at a situation of scarcity. Kevin mentioned volatility. Now look at what scarcity does to it. When water is viewed as a scarce item, I mean, maybe it's not quite like gold, but anything else that starts to run into scarcity starts to have a dollar value attached to it pretty promptly. That's where I think we're going to be.
Yeah.
So this
It
is
looks like
so
we're going to have to learn more about hybrid wheat going forward, Mike.
I
Yeah.
think what
either
you're obviously your company's going to continue to create something that can produce with less. Maybe see sorghum come into more production acres. We're about 6.5 million acres of sorghum. We could double that, and does that really make a dent? But I see some challenges for corn, but based on the water demand and the fact that we've got so much of it, that is there still going to be support? I a long time ago made a point that I believe ethanol is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Short-term solution meaning we're gobbling up now these bushels. Long-term problem is we've always had too many bushels. And so I think that these are going to be some of the headwinds that we face. But again, it goes back to water. And then we already were looking at scarcity. I was a little boy about the same time playing with my matchboxes. Well, a few years later than that, I started picking up different publications and read about the Ogallala Aquifer. Well, we're 40 years later, and we still got the same issue. So I think that water is going to be the absolute big deal.
Here's an interesting thing. So I had two sisters that lived in Arizona, and I love the landscaping there. I know there's getting to be less grass. It's just kind of neat to see some of that landscaping come back in. That's probably more adapted to the area. Across the U.S., so speaking of water, and this is one thing, I mean, I know ag always gets thrown at too, because there's a high concentration in certain areas, obviously Ogallala Aquifer and so forth. But turf grass wise, there's about 45 million acres of turf grass that's irrigated in the U.S.
Is
And
that many?
from a water consumption standpoint, we actually use about 2 to 3 times more water on turf grass than we do
Mhm.
corn.
Mhm.
So it might be interesting to see how the dynamics change in that industry as well. You know, you think about there's been a lot of talk, not saying a lot of push yet, but you know, what does the landscape look like in landscape business? And I know we were
I was
talking
just
about
talking
irrigating
about
their
turning
own
my lawn
lawns here because
sprinklers on.
right, right,
Yeah. So
right.
well, there's going to be first off. Here's the big one though. Every half acre, and I'm assuming you're talking about lawns, right? So,
Mhm.
okay,
Yep.
every lawn has a lawn owner, and every lawn owner votes. Tell me how many votes agriculture has.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not near
that's a
enough.
good point too, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about in any way political challenge. Ag loses because of the sheer numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, and you can say, oh, you can't restrict our water out here in western Nebraska. We're feeding the world. Well, no, you're feeding the ethanol plant, and so the mantra from ag has always been, let us do whatever we want and leave us alone because we feed the world, and you'd be hungry without us. That is A, not necessarily true, and B, really that argument's gotten a little long in the tooth, right? Because there's going to be a consumer base that says we've only been worried about food once, and that was for about 3 weeks during the COVID time when people were fighting over toilet paper in the Kroger store. Other than that, there's no issue. So I don't know that the whole thing of leave us alone because we're feeding the world it plays as well as it once did because there's so much excess supply.
Moving in there, like in the short term, water or short and long term, water is going to become a bigger and bigger issue in there. What do you think's happening with farm size and succession plans and things like that? If you had a crystal ball and you said in 7 years, farms are going to look like this versus today.
In 5 years, maybe even sooner, the bifurcation is going to accelerate more than it already has because in difficult economic times for agriculture, which let's face it, generally for the last 20 to 25 years, we've been in an upswing. I hear the people saying, no, you don't remember 2014 to 2018? Like, yeah, I remember. And then also the government threw a whole bunch of money, tariff relief money and all those different things. MPP, I think they call it MFP, whatever it was. In general, we've been in a really strong upswing from early 2000s till a couple of years ago, 2023, 21, 22, and 23 record farm, years in terms of the best farm incomes we've had in the history of American agriculture. So the bifurcation is going to be, and in case you forgot your dictionary, that means categories of two, is going to accelerate. There's going to be large scale commodity producers that buy your shuttles of seed, and they are going to get larger. There's a guy named a company called Aimpoint Research. I heard him speak a couple of years ago at a meeting. I've had him on my Business of Agriculture show, and they said they're going to end up being around 60 to 65,000 producers that are responsible for about 90% of all ag revenue. Where we are right now, there's 1.8, 1.9 million farms in the United States of America. Of the 1.9 million, 150,000 do almost all the heavy lifting in way of production. I'm not being mean. It's not a judgment. These are pure numbers. You can look it up at the National Ag Statistics Service. So let's say that whittles down to about 100,000 or less. So there's going to be about 1.7. We'll continue to decrease some farms. But remember, there's going to be the folks that are farms on paper. There's going to be that. There will be niche. We have 26% of the global economy happens here in the United States of America. We have an affluent customer base. There will be room for organic grass-fed hens that are named Larry, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's going to be that category for niche, and there's going to be large-scale commodity production. This farm economy right now does generally tend to accelerate that. We're going to see still room for niche category stuff, and there's going to be the farms on paper only. One thing that, in general, the farm numbers are going to come down, and a lot of folks in ag get very sentimental about this. And you understand, people living. I was born in 1969. There's 3 million farms in the United States. Today there's 1.8 to 1.9 million. So we've already dropped by, a significant number in 56 years. Where I'm going with this is it doesn't change the production. To Kevin and Kevin's point, there's going to be massive amounts of commodity production because we're really good at making commodities. Water's going to restrict some of that. Some conservation issues are going to restrict some of that. High high inputs on less returnable marginal type ground will change some of that. But in general, we're going to see this continual divergence from the large and consolidated. And a lot of folks, they get it wrong. They think that government policy perpetuates that. Actually, remember, a lot of the policies have restrictions, right? On like this $12 billion that's going to go out. It's capped at $155,000 per entity. So the reality is these programs might even be propping up some of the smaller operators. But when you look at the demographics, and you've seen some of my commentary about this, you got a lot of these boomers that are 75 years old that are still hanging around because they don't know what else they would do other than go out and drive around in their tractor. And when they are gone, that land gets liquidated, and the 5,000 acre operation becomes a 10,000 acre operation. So that's where we're going to go. I just don't see any.
Yeah.
I don't see any
It's
way.
it's amazing how land prices have stayed up there. I mean, commodity prices were, whatever they were a few years ago, and you think, oh, land price will fall it right down. They haven't. Land prices have been solid. And
Yeah.
you get some guys that aren't connected with the family farm anymore. Dad wants or sells it or passes away, and the heirs are left, and they live in the city. They don't want to own that land anymore. I mean,
Yeah, people get really emotional about this, and I get it. I'm farm kid. I got pictures of my farm up here behind my wall right now, or behind my desk. I get it, but it's pure emotion that drives all those judgments. That all the people at the coffee shop lamenting that, those kids went and moved to Omaha. They don't even care about the family farm. Well, why should they? I'm not being mean. I mean, let's just remove all emotion. What if mom died and had $1 million of stock in AT&T? Are they supposed to hold that? Well, it's different between a family farm and a stock. Well, they're both assets. They're both supposed to be appreciating assets that are on the balance sheet. I think that this emotional attachment is nice. I've got it. Trust me. I think it's great. De La Rosa Farms and the whole graveyard out in the pasture and all that stuff. But if I had children, which I do not, or grandchildren, and I'm 90 and my grandkids are living in Chicago and they say, yeah, we're going to sell that asset. Why would I have such a harsh judgment about it when it was something that was very dear to me? But why should I have expected it to be so dear to someone that grew up in the suburbs, in La Vista, Nebraska? And so I think that's that. And then, by the way, it's my perception that that's changing. You're about the last generation that still has that thing about, oh, you don't sell the family farm. I think after this, it's like, it's just like a stock in AT&T.
yeah. Kowalski, what up? You're up.
I just keep thinking about his water comment. I mean, I did have to look it up. Nebraska is number 3 in mileage of streams and rivers and creeks. So we still have plenty of water, but again, it just one of those things that I didn't really think about water being such a big deal. So I appreciate that comment. It's already
Kevin,
making me think.
hop on an airplane and depart Omaha and start flying out west from Omaha to where I live now during the winter in Phoenix, and look down and see all those circles. And as you're looking down, and trust me, I love these people. The irrigation companies have hired me. Valley has hired me. What the other, all of them, Ranky, all of them, and
Zematic, yeah.
Zematic has been a client of mine. I love the irrigation companies. They've been clients of mine. But when you look down and see all those circles, and again, and you say, those circles are producing something that we have so much of. We lobbied to invent a law to burn it up. And when you look at it from that perspective, again, look at this is very important because ag people struggle with this. Look at it from a perspective that is not a farmer perspective. And again, now I'm sitting on this airplane. I just departed Omaha. I'm flying to my winter home in Phoenix, and I make $200,000 with my business. Let's say I have a job, and I'm kind of pissed because about 40% of it goes to taxes. And then I'm looking out the window and I'm that person and I say, I pay for all those circles down there. I pay for all these agricultural programs to grow this stuff. And we got so much of it, we're paying these guys to grow more of it so that China can get a better deal on our soybeans. And so that's where I really think there's going to be. Trust me, I'm as pro ag as ag gets. I just think that we would do ourselves a big favor to look at things from the perspective of the non-ag public, which is almost everybody besides us.
Yep.
Yeah. Back
No,
when
I guess,
you and
Mike, what I was thinking is the family farm, I could sell it. It's got the water rights on it right there in Loop City, Nebraska. I'd sell it to Google. They can put up their data centers, pump all the water they want, and we just be happy, go lucky.
just put windmills over the hills and pump the
You got
water
the
out.
energy. There's so many windmills over there. So I mean, you got that settled. It's prime spot right in the middle of the US.
So when you think about it, again, I point out the realities of these numbers, and I'm not doing it in any way to be mean nor critical. I'm simply giving you sort of a reality check. Mike gave me credit for my ag commentaries, and you said it also. Sometimes it doesn't win many popularity contests to point out some of these realities, but I'm the guy out here that's sort of the mirror for ag. I'm old enough to remember when we talked about how we don't have enough oil. I already gave you that example. I'm old enough to remember when we had the energy crisis in the 1970s. This is no kidding. For a year, my second grade year, it happened a couple times. They kept the thermostat at like 56 degrees at Northwest Elementary School. Told us to wear sweaters and jackets to come to it, and then only turned the lights on above the chalkboard because there was no energy. Here we are today, almost 50 years later. We have copious amounts of this. Now they're saying, oh, we might have to have less energy so we can power the data centers. So we didn't even power the damn schools for me in second grade so I could learn. And here we are now talking about we're going to take all the energy and give it to these data centers. And if you notice, again, look at who controls the narrative. In ag, you're losing on this one because of sheer numbers. Trust me, you're just losing this one. When now it's energy is not bad. You guys are just old enough to remember nuclear energy. Oh my God, we're all going to die. 3 Mile Island, which you aren't old enough to remember, we're all going to die because 3 Mile Island had a leak and that nuclear energy is bad. But who's controlling the narrative now? When big tech and big money now says, wait a minute, nuclear's good. Nuclear's good. Now there's this entire sea change that nuclear's not bad anymore. It was just 30, 40 years ago. Now nuclear's good. Windmills are good. Oil is good. Coal, watch. Coal is going to be framed as, oh, well, it's not like the old days. Coal used to be bad, but now it's not anymore. Because the narrative, when the big money, BlackRock, one of the huge private equity entities in the world, is buying a utility in the state of Indiana. So why would this huge capital, historically, you know who owned utility companies? Your grandma. Your grandma was 74 years old and she needed a safe investment. So her stockbroker invested in Dayton Power and Light. And it cranked out a 4.5% dividend every year. It was just a nice, safe, secure place. Why would BlackRock, literally trillions of dollars, why would they be getting in the utilities business? Which grandma used to be in it because it was a safe little 4% return. Why? Because they look at a future where we're going to quadruple our energy consumption and there's going to be massive amounts of money being made there. So again, who loses? If ag wants the water or if ag wants the power, ain't going to happen. It's going to go where there's bigger money and bigger votes.
All those things become cool then, huh? The coal, the nuclear, and everything like that.
And your listeners, I get it. People think I'm a little bit out there, and you know how common it is. I just had a guy come to me at one of my events just last week, 2 weeks ago. He said, "You know what?" He said, "I remember being in one of your audiences, and I liked your stuff, and you're kind of funny, and you made some good points." He said, "I remember distinctly thinking to myself, this guy just said that China is our enemy." And that China's going to go away as a customer and they will do everything they can to set up other countries. And he's like, this was like 12 years ago you started saying this. And I thought to myself, every ag meeting I go to just talks about, hail China. China's going to buy more of our soybeans. Oh, if China could just... And he's like, you were out there way in front of this. I think I'm there on this whole issue of energy and on water and on regulation.
I just seen a chart the other day about China's electrical capacity is insane right now. They are building coal plants, they're building nuclear, they're building solar panels, they're
Yeah.
building everything.
I think I
And I
saw that
imagine
they're going. I think I saw that. I saw a chart also, like you were talking about, but the sheer number, it's some ungodly thing. Like they're going to throw 50 coal power plants on the grid in the next like year, meaning about averaging one a week.
wow,
Uh,
that's
yeah.
so
So it's interesting that you mentioned, I mean, so coal and all these things, nuclear coming back online as being good now. I was even going that way in my mind, before even talking through, water regulation and things like that. But I feel like that's starting to happen in ag, that you're starting to see the shift back to energies when you look at sustainable air, aviation fuel, low carbon fuels, things of that nature, where we're starting to see the shift go back that way. And, and maybe you've already answered that, but, what's the long and short of that as
Well, the
well? It's
benefit,
just, that's all energy markets.
yeah, the benefit, okay, uh, massive amounts of increases in energy consumption generally would favor ag because we're now, as basically in the last 20 years since the renewable fuel standard, we now are in the business of energy production, right? Because of the biofuel situation. So generally that favors us, but we don't make electricity. Obviously, it's all transportation. So it's
mhm.
going to require to keep the demand there, it's going to require legislation, which Europe is pushing that, right? On a certain amount of jet fuel has to be sustainable aviation fuel, which tends to be, made from corn generally, right? Um, but the efficiency is not there. I mean, last numbers I saw, it was like 5 times or 4 times as expensive to make jet fuel out of corn as it is to just make jet fuel out of oil that you pump out of the ground. So it's going to require legislation. But in general, energy, massive energy consumption increases probably bode well for us, but it's still not enough that the prices are not. In other words, it's not economically viable still without legislation. So that's where we
So
are.
so what are the things that gotta we always think about driving commodity prices to keep them strong is trade. Um, how do you think our trade complexion looks over the next 5 years? I know we probably can't depend on China going back and being a big customer, can we?
No,
Or unless they need it.
China's objective since way before anybody even started. I looked around in the year 2013. This is why I was ahead of the curve. And they were announcing the Belt and Road Initiative, or the New Silk Road, where they were going to deploy billions of dollars. And the number they put out there has been dwarfed, meaning they've spent a hell of a lot more than that. The Belt and Road Initiative meant they were going, essentially, it's economic colonialism, going to third world countries or developing countries that they could deploy their capital and thereby ascertain control and access to uh, resources they require. So China went to Brazil, and Brazil is, if we're 26% of the global economy, Brazil's a little less than 2%. They've got a pretty big population, biggest population in all of Latin America, but also economically don't even, they're China's sitting there as the number 2 economy in the world. Brazil's the 13th or something like this. So China can control Brazil. You could argue that China, politically had a big influence in what happens there and who the leaders are, or whatever. China went to the west coast of South America and put in the world's largest harbor, the largest shipping port. So this thing's been going on for a long time. We were nothing more, like when you got a girlfriend for a while, but it's only until the better one comes along. That's what we were for China. We were a massive amount of supply for them until they could get supply somewhere else. Their intention was never to be a customer of ours forever. We got lazy. We thought it was great. Hey, China's going to buy some soybeans. We're making 50%, what I just tell you, 70% more corn than we did 25 years ago. Well, it's about the same story on soybeans, about the same story on pork. All that was because of China. So it's not going to happen again. And no, this idea that, we can just work I tune into every one of these hack ag economists. We can just get China to buy some more stuff. It ain't going to happen. Their entire goal was to circumvent us, and that's what's going to happen. Trade is not going to be our silver bullet like it has been for North American agriculture for all of our lives because the world is becoming more protectionist. When
But
you've
so
got
you think the secret would be to process our corn and our soybeans into higher value products in the US and then try to export them that way?
yeah,
Or
well, and one of those things, of course, is process them into higher valued products like chicken and pork and beef, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah, turn it into red meat.
yeah, turn it into meat. So probably, but remember, when you're talking about the amount of supply that's on the global market, that is not likely to change. Remember, we got told 4 years ago with this Ukraine thing, oh my goodness, there are going to be big shortages. There was shortages for like two places. Sunflower oil became in short supply in Morocco because they didn't have Ukrainian sunflowers. Did it hurt anything here? Did it even really change our prices by a blip? So that's the challenge. We look at this trade thing because it's what we've always done because we make so much supply. And I'm like, that's great, that's wonderful, but there's not going to be another ag boom based on trade. There's too many other competitors. There's too much supply and too much productive capacity in other countries, and not to mention we're at a record demand in the world. 8 billion people are eating really well, but we're also at record supply. And I don't know what would change that. I don't see. And I did a video about that. What would be the real threat to productive capacity? The only thing would be geopolitical or political, taking the tools
Yeah.
away from us.
Well, I know that. And you look at population curves, what the world looks like in 10 years or even 20 years. And you see the European countries, Russia's population decline, even China's population decline,
Mm.
which isn't a big percent, but it's a lot of people, less people there. The big countries that are growing are in Africa and stuff. But is there any hope that we could ever develop those markets where there's millions of people growing or
Well, population is going to continue to decline. It's going to increase for the next maybe decade or so. And I started calling this a long time ago. I remember again, my audience thought I was crazy when I said, you've been told we're going to overpopulate and we're all going to die of starvation. It ain't happening. The United Nations at one point predicted 11.5 billion humans on Earth. And I said, we won't even get to 9. There's a ag company, an animal pharmaceutical company, just about 15 years ago. They loved it so much because they wanted ag people like to tell them stuff that's a convenient story. We're going to feed the world. We're going to overpopulate. We're going to have 11 billion people. One of the ag companies had a big slogan 15, 20 years ago. Feed the 9, feed the 9. If we don't keep making more animal pharmaceuticals, we're all going to starve. Feed the 9, meaning 9 billion people. We're at 8 billion people. We're leveling off. As you said, there's about a dozen countries that have a significant percentage of population growth, but they're starting with a very small number. Major population centers are in decline. Fertility rates need to be at 2.1 babies per female to remain at static, and we're in the United States at 1.6. All of Western Europe's like 1.2. You're talking about almost half. South Korea, if you've heard my stuff, South Korea is
hmm,
one of the dominant economies in Asia, but as a fertility rate of 0.8, they're at roughly 1/3 of what it takes, which means their population will drop by 1/3 every 20 years until there's essentially no South Korea. So what's that mean? A complete mindset shift for what we do. We're always about, oh, we got to feed more people. Ain't going to happen. The whole continent of Africa is around 1.5 billion. So a little bit more population in the whole continent of Africa than are in China or India, which are right around 1.3 billion or so. Um, but here's the tough part. The entire continent of Africa, which is 54 countries, not one country. People get this wrong. It's a continent, not a country. 54 countries. The entire economy, the GDP of the entire continent of Africa is a little less than Canada with 40 million people. So
oh
when people
wow.
say, does Africa have the promise to become the new China? I'm like, well, first off, you got 54 different governments to deal with, not to mention tribal uprisings and whatnot. And we would do better for ag to have Canada with 40 million people as our customer than the entire continent of Africa. There's just not enough economy there. If they double their economy, it's almost insignificant. And
Yeah.
that's the tough part.
That's the difficult. Yeah. Where the growth is happening, they just don't have the economies to purchase our stuff. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, where do we have an opportunity? Mexico is an ascending economy, about
Hmm.
130 million people, big country. There's a growth curve there on their purchasing power, et cetera. They've got a few problems, though. Obviously, with the cartels, basically, we're kind of telling the government we're in charge, not you. So that makes things a bit of a challenge. The situation,
Yeah.
with- the situation in Canada, Canada is a very export-driven agriculture in terms of bulk commodities. They kind of want to be like us. They just want to find more places to put stuff on a ship and ship it to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Keller, Kowalski, got anything else?
Keller's bored. Keller's bored. He's
Keller's
over there. He's
bored.
on his
Yeah.
phone
He's
jacking
looking
off.
I've
at that.
I've been making notes here, and so every time I look down, I'm writing something down. But there's a lot to think about here, because and that's why we like your perspective, is that it's different than maybe the typical narrative when it comes to ag. So it is something to um, kind of get people thinking a little bit more about maybe breaking out of the mold.
I I mean I get it that I'm out here with a pretty different take than many deliver, but again, these silos, that's the word I guess they use around corporate. These silos that we just keep saying the same stuff, and I look at them like, how would you still think this? How would you still think that somehow? Oh, and again, I listen. I'm in here doing my workout in my workout room, and I listen to some ag media from different places, and they go right to the whole thing. Well, China's going to buy some soybeans. I'm like, what do you not see here? What is it that you don't see here? This is this ship has sailed, and so that's going to be the challenging aspect of all of this. I'm not a doomsdayer. I believe that what we can do in the United States is, and Mike mentioned it. I shot a video about this. I think the future for us is moving away from just pure bulk commodity and more about maybe value added. What if the next thing is Pioneer has three kinds of corn? Now, I'm not talking about three different varieties or numbers based on, what zip code you're in. I'm talking about three. What if there's corn for ethanol?
Yeah.
I'm within 40 minutes of three ethanol plants at my farm in Huntington, Indiana. So what if there's corn that has a starch content which is 50% more than what we used to grow, and that is amazing, and the ethanol plants pay a premium for that. Then I have another kind of corn for my dairymen that's just silage corn. You already kind of have that, right? You just talk about
Mhm.
tons of silage versus
Silage
special whatever.
specific
Yeah,
hybrids. Yeah.
yeah. And then what if there's the kind of corn that is going to go to Frito-Lay? And we already say, oh, you already got food grade. No, I'm talking about where it's got a nutritive index. And instead of it just being sold for 56 pounds, number two yellow corn, which the CME group loves, they invented the whole thing, right? Chicago Board of Trade invented this whole commodity thing so it became tradable, right? Then it becomes
Yeah.
a bushel is a bushel is a bushel, 56 pound, number two yellow corn, blah, 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 60-pound soybeans. And one of it becomes a nutrient um, level that's associated with it. So that there's corn that goes to the grocery store for humans, and that is a markedly different corn than goes to the ethanol plant, or a markedly different corn that goes to feed my beef cows. That's where I wonder if we can and start attaching the value. It decommoditized. So I've been saying
Yeah.
this now for about the last year to my audiences. We're talking about a decommoditization and an industry that spent a long time becoming pure commodity because it was easily marketable, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the big question: who benefited from becoming pure commoditization? Was it the producer that's listening to this show right now? Not really. Not
Hmm.
really. It was everybody in
No.
between, everybody after the farm that benefited from making it number two yellow corn. You know, a gallon of North Brent crude or whatever. The producer didn't necessarily benefit from that. I mean, yeah, you had a market, but you didn't have any. What would be the incentive other than pure bushels? Like our friend Kowalski over here bragging up the 369 bushel corn, which I think is probably a lie. He probably
Yeah.
made that up and put his thumb on the scale.
He blows a lot.
Yeah, I think so. You can tell he's
But
chill.
yeah, I think I completely agree with that. I just think, a typical corn breeder today is driving agronomics for something that's got good roots, good stalks, and produces a ton of bushels that is harvestable. Not so much on the characteristics of the food quality, whether it's higher protein corn or harder starch corn or whatever. And I think that's probably the future where we can decommoditize these crops and add more value to them in the marketplace
Well, we
that
have
way.
production covered. I'm not being mean, and the pioneer geneticist that is working. I'm not in any way devaluing what you do in the lab. It's amazing. It's wonderful. But let's just use the tomato as an example. And I've read about it, and we made tomatoes so that they're really good at shelf life. They transport without being smashed and mushing all over the place, and they hang around in the grocery store for a long time, and they look good. They taste like crap. Okay. A tomato that I get out of Mrs. Mason's garden in August and July is amazing. It smells like the earth. And you're like, oh my God, if I could just buy a
Just
tomato like this at the Kroger or the Piggly Wiggly or Hy-Vee to go ahead and reference where you people live, it'd be amazing. But you can't. Why did that happen? Because we prioritized transportability, shelf life, and appearance, not flavor. So can we also maybe make the point that we've done that with everything else in agriculture? We made it so that corn was very marketable, commoditized security, and it looks good unless it has, unless it has valmitoxin or whatever it is. It's 56 pounds, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. What if the consumer would pay premium for something else? No, they won't. We think that. We think the consumer is going to never pay a premium for anything other than what we give them cheap. We think that because we're cheap. If the consumer is only driven by what's cheap, there wouldn't be a place called Whole Foods, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, we're getting up against our time frame here,
Yeah,
Damien.
I talk
Just
too much. I talk too
love
much.
love the conversation. I enjoy just thinking differently about things. I pick out corn hybrids for our company in this part of the world. I look at them and stuff like that. So I will be thinking about things in the future like that. Um, Keller, Kowalski, you guys got any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I
Kowalski,
just really appreciate the conversation. Like I said before, it's fun being challenged in a way that we think, and I hope that more people welcome being challenged in the way that they think.
well,
Yep.
they don't. you know,
And you hear all about it, obviously.
they
Not saying we always
generally.
have to agree with those that are challenging us, but it's a way to get yourself out of a rut.
Well, I think the other one is, being very frank here, is, we opened up with Mike asking me about my background in comedy. And so I can tell you one thing that I see a bunch of folks that work in agriculture. I'm talking about from the producers on up to the industry types like you, whatever, that they're so they're so fragile because they get told you're feeding the world and thank a farmer. If you ate today, thank a farmer. And I'm not being mean. I'm giving you the brutal truth. I wrote a book once called The Brutal Truth. You know, I did comedy. And you know what? You have an accountant come up to you after you're done and tell you sucked. Okay. So
I can
I'm
see
pretty
that.
good at taking feedback. And I think if you can't look at your what you do and give yourself some critical feedback, you're pretty fragile. And that's a tough part about agriculture. I feel like sometimes I'm out here delivering some of these truths, and it's instead of saying, you know what, that's really down. You said, Kevin, you said it's neat to be challenged to think differently. Um, yeah, and the thing is, we got a pretty fragile customer base out here that struggles sometimes to hear anything that's, I tell these ag people, I'm not being mean, I'm being honest. Trust me. Back in my comedy days, I worked for every other organization out there you can imagine: the Car Dealers Association, the insurance people, the funeral directors. I used to go to speak at all these meetings. I said, guess what? There's only one industry, only one, where they opened a meeting with a Paul Harvey poem saying that God made a farmer. You don't go to the Construction Contractors Association and they say, hey, real quickly before we open the meeting, let's play this poem and pat ourselves in the back and say, so God made a construction worker. They don't do that. So we do have a little bit of a hero complex. And so I'm not being mean. I'm just giving you some of the thoughts that you probably need to hear, um, whether it's about population, realities of trade, um, decommoditization. These aren't in any way criticisms. They're just predictions and thoughts from a perspective that we don't commonly hear.
Yep. Something we need to hear too. So
Yeah. And by the way, I'm the biggest proponent of the whole business going, man. Like I said, I got a picture of my farm over here, and I'm
yeah,
all about it. I'm all
yeah.
about it. And I was going to be an agronomist, by the way. So you know, you got your agronomy people in there. I wanted to be an agronomist when I went to Purdue, and then they gave me a I think it was a biochemistry book, and I said, "Ooh, yeah, maybe not." So yeah.
Well, thank you, Damon. And you want to listen to your commentary, The Business of Agriculture. It is on what platforms?
Everywhere, pretty much every audio platform carries the business of agriculture. You can find all my stuff at damianmason.com. I'm very active on Facebook, on X, and on LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. So go to the YouTube, type in Damian Mason, and hit subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. I'm also on Acres TV. So very much. And if you ever have a meeting where you want somebody to get on stage and talk for 60 or 90 minutes about the future of agriculture with an entertaining twist and some challenging thoughts, as Keller already pointed out. By the way, Kowalski here, he reminds me of like the little brother I never had. He looks like he's about 18, maybe
I
16.
relate to him that way.
Yeah. He looks like he's about 16 years old. And I just want to like have him drive around the truck with me and like I can just, like mentor
He's
him.
he's sneaky smart. He's sneaky smart.